Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin. Where are
You
we
know,
traveling to?
very wow, you got this. You got the segue in literally in the first 28 seconds. I like that. Why, really? We're getting smooth. Now that we're now that we're already, I think, in episode 21, believe it or not, uh, you've really gotten, you're really sliding things in even smoother
Well,
of
I do
late.
my best. I
I
do my
think,
best.
I think so. But where are we going today? Now, this is a funny statement I'm going to make. If you think it's not easy to get out to Eastern Long Island now, think about it before Sunrise Highway.
Yeah,
Oh
right. Oh
my
my
gosh.
gosh.
I mean, think about it before then. So we're going to go back, Esperanza. How about if we go back 50 years to 1972? And in 1972, a couple of things happened. Um, the Long Island Expressway was completed. In other words, it went all the way to where it currently ends, which is exit 73, all the way in Riverhead, which isn't really that germane to what we're talking about because we're really talking about the South Fork today. But Sunrise Highway, the Sunrise Highway extension that we know of now, the one that goes through West Hampton Beach and goes through Quogue and Hampton Bays, that was also completed in 1972.
Mhm.
So prior to that, and we were talking about this before we went on, you remember actually having to go through the Riverhead traffic circle to get out here. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, that was always like it was an alternative
Right.
because really by the time that we came out here, my family, we like this was completed,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So it was a few years after it was brand new.
Correct.
Um,
Exactly.
but I do know that it was still a route that some people would take because back when you still used a map,
Right.
it seemed to be that was like the direct route as
Right.
opposed to getting off on exit 70 and da 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 and doing this and doing that. It was
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And but to your point, those were people that were doing this by choice. Prior to 1972 and the completion of Sunrise Highway as we know it, you had no other option. You were going, you were exiting at exit 68 and you were weaving your way through Riverhead and going through that traffic circle. Long and the short of it is the new Sunrise Highway, this 12-mile section, that really basically ended at Shinnecock Hills, led out onto County Road 39, was
Mm-hmm.
completed at a cost of $29.5 million at the time, um, was completed in 1972. And prior to that, people were really going through that traffic circle. And it was all about really, and this is, I'm quoting now at the time, Raymond Schuler, the state transportation commissioner, it's safety and convenience for the countless thousands of people who will use it, and it's traffic relief for at least a half a dozen communities.
Yes.
Okay. But already, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but I'm just going to throw the teaser out to start. The state traffic transportation department was planning for before the end of the year discussing the extension of the Sunrise Highway through the remainder of the Hamptons to Amagansett.
It's so incredible to me because I can't even picture that alternative,
Yeah.
right? But
I
I know that we would always because we would travel a lot when I was little, when I was a child, and my father being of that generation, sort of that post-war, build kind
right.
of Robert Moses mentality, right? And he would kind of go like, why didn't they extend this right through? He couldn't understand why it would just stop there when you got out at, in Manorville, right? He'd be like,
Right.
this is ridiculous.
It,
They should
it,
have just continued.
that's right. And remember now, we always talk about uh, the different eras out here, and our last episode, I remember we were talking about the Signet Gallery, and which was late 50s, 1960. So now we're already 10 or 12 years prior beyond that, 10 or 12 years more people, more traffic, more
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah.
Forget present day. I mean, we're going back 50 years, but Now, here's the other thing. So Sunrise Highway was completed, and and I guess a lot of people probably felt like your father did at that time. Had that kind of thinking. The Speaker of the New York State Assembly was Perry Duryea.
Yeah.
Now, this is Montauk. I remember we had an episode when we were talking about Culloden Shores, about Montauk royalty.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
The Duryeas are Montauk royalty. And remember, you had the Speaker of the Assembly, and it's always been said about Albany. It's three people in a room: the governor, the Speaker of the Assembly, and the leader of the state Senate. So you had a guy from small town Montauk, Long Island. He was one of the three people in the room. And
Yes.
Sunrise Highway was completed, and all of these routes, proposed for this final section of Sunrise Highway, which was this extension, all met with a lot of opposition. We're going to get into that. But State Assembly Speaker Perry B. Duryea Jr., Republican of Montauk, through whose district the highway goes right through, said the state was prepared to move quickly once federal approval for this final stretch was received. Now, Raymond Schuler, who we just mentioned, the state transportation commissioner at the time, state was going to pay 2/3. The federal government was going to pay the balance, the other third, for this completed section of the road, which would handle 3,000 cars an hour at its peak. And remember, now this is circa early 1970s, saving up to an hour on a trip to and from New York City.
I'm going to guess that in the 1950s, 60s, what do you think? It would take 4 hours to get out here?
Easy.
Right?
Now, remember, in the 50s and 60s, I believe the expressway ended in Smithtown. So you were zigging and zagging.
Right, old Montauk Highway, all through all the little towns, right?
Right. So you were either zigging, from Smithtown, which is on the north shore of Suffolk County, and either cutting south to Montauk Highway and dealing with it that way, or just going straight down 25 through Riverhead and doing. So I don't know, but yeah, I would say 4 hours,
4.5 hours,
minimum,
easy.
and we're talking without traffic, like just a normal ride.
Right, because there were probably less cars on the road.
Correct.
I would assume.
You would certainly think so. And again, now there was another county legislator, H. Beecher Halsey. I mean, I'm going to assume that's that name, who was also fighting for his for roads in his district, surveying the scene, and said, "Well, we'll find out if it really does any good." So
next May 30th, next Memorial Day, because essentially we're talking about an issue here that was an issue for like 12 weeks out of the year, right?
That's right. That's a great point, because while the pandemic and life and everything has changed and has certainly made Eastern Long Island more of a year-round community than it was certainly 50 years ago. Because 50 years ago, to your point, and I agree with you, it was 12 weeks a year. I mean, it was really a Memorial Day. Look, you were a little girl at the time, but it was true. I mean, it was
truly Tumbleweed Tuesday after Labor Day.
Right. Those people, right. Those people, the summer people, the city people were gone, and it really was Tumbleweed Tuesday. So now we fast forward, into 1973. And now remember, there was a couple of things. This parkway, and we should really go over the route of what this parkway was supposedly going to be. We're going to do it loosely, but it was going to really extend now remember, Sunrise Highway ended where we know it now at County Road 39, which I guess is Shinnecock Hills, Southampton at the very beginning. And it was going to go towards the north. So it was going to go, I guess, through North Sea, traveling, through, continuing eastward through Watermill, the northern reaches of Bridgehampton, ultimately wiggling into the northwest section of East Hampton over 3 Mile Harbor Road. And we're doing this loosely, but just to give you an idea.
Right. Nowhere near the coast of the southern coast. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's, you think there was a little Robert Moses-esque kind of thing
Oh,
where
yeah, a little
would
bit
he
of
would
an elitism here
yeah
involved. Yeah.
he
Nobody
would
lives there.
he
Not
exactly
nobody important lives there.
he would take Robert Moses could be a subject for another day, but he made a farmer like go miles out of his way, but wouldn't move the Northern State Parkway all the way to Old Country Road and back to not interfere with the robber barons. But that's when we do a Robert Moses podcast, we'll discuss that.
Okay.
Living up island, I used to curse when I was on that Northern State Parkway, that south and then going back north. But anyway, now this 2-lane parkway. Now, remember, this was originally what was supposed to be a 4-lane parkway.
Even more incredible, yeah.
Was going to be 4 lanes, 2 lanes each way. It was designed to eliminate congestion along Route 27, which passed through the South Fork villages. And it would run, as we mentioned, from Shinnecock Hills to east of Amagansett, ultimately going sort of parallel to Stony Hill Road along the railroad, and then it would let out onto 27, I guess, somewhere around the peak. The cost was estimated at $39 million. I'm going to have to take a pause and just imagine that road if we can. Putting ourselves back 50 years if this thing ever happened. And we're going to get into the what ifs a little bit later, but it really is, the whole thing is hard to fathom. Now, the route that was announced was a modification of one of 5 alternate roads proposed. So it was only going to become 2 lanes instead of the 4, and the state would acquire a 500-foot right-of-way, which would permit the subsequent expansion. And unlike the original path, this is according to this story.
Sorry, I have to get a chuckle out of this.
I mean,
you just mentioned Robert Moses.
We just read through, and apparently it was going to avoid the house of the Suffolk County Republican leader, Edwin Schwenk. Okay.
But forget about all those other people that would displace, 41 other houses, 13 commercial establishments that existed on 1,300 acres of farmland and woodland.
And I think that's really where we have to get a little bit. Thank you for Esperanza for that, because that really, there was talk. This was, now again, we're going back, try to paint the picture. 1972. Lot more farmland than we have now, a lot less development than we have now. 41 houses, 13 commercial establishments on 1,300 acres of farmland and woodland that the state would need to buy or condemn. Now, some of the people would be displaced. Mrs. Anthony Tiska. I remember the name Tiska. Do you remember that name? Does that ring?
I don't know.
Okay. I remember that was a farming family in Bridgehampton. They farmed 300 acres. Besides our houses, said Mrs. Tiska, they are taking good farmland simply to build a road that, here was your point, that will be used 12 weeks a year when the summer people came out.
Yeah.
So now, there was a route change that was sought. Mrs. Tiska and her family, several neighbors were contemplating action to change the route to go more northerly than they were. I guess not in my backyard, but, send it to someone else's maybe, or maybe it was less than, I don't know. I mean, but Ben Stark of Amagansett, the chairman of the East End Council of Organizations, said, I guess we're somewhat relieved to have won a slight victory just because the state cut it down to 2 lanes.
Right.
So this is what was going on. Now, Esperanza, I went and dug into the East Hampton Star and read the Hamptons Bypass editorial of 1973, which I don't think we really have to dig all too deeply into it. I mean, we could touch on it, but basically at the end of it, and I guess this was Everett Rattray at the time was the editor of the Star, was writing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to be damned if we build the bypass, most likely. It will no doubt bring more people to the area and probably hasten the day when ours is a bedroom community. We are also going to be damned if we don't. We are going to have an ever increasing traffic in our villages. Think about this. This is 50 years ago.
Right.
We are going to have an ever increasing traffic in our villages, probably to the point, as has happened in other Long Island communities, the very elms are threatened by road widening activities. But we can make the best of the situation. We can, if we take the long view and hold together, prevail and make sure that this necessary road. So I guess he sort
was for the development. Yeah.
Yeah. We can, if we take the long view, prevail and make sure that this necessary road is laid out in such a manner as to allow the least possible damage to the local economy, landscape, and ecology.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'm trying to picture this. I really am. And as we know, 27 is saturated.
Right.
People have found alternate routes here in Wainscott. I mean, you've got 27 running through, which people think that's downtown Wainscott, when in fact there is a main street in Wainscott. Well,
Right.
That main street now is very highly trafficked. And that is one lane in, one lane out, basically, right? And I'm really wondering, I don't think this would have helped a whole lot.
And, Esperanza, I'm just thinking, you think it's possible we could rename Wainscott Main Street the Wainscott Bypass? Because in a sense, it sort of is in a little bit,
has
right?
become, yeah, exactly.
I mean, believe me, when I was going back and forth, when I was traveling back up island every Sunday night, and I would turn on Waze, or it would take me down there.
Of course it does.
It would take me down there. And so now, I guess we also have to bring out at the time, in addition to an editorial like that, there was a very, very active committee called Esperanza. I have to tell you, in a little aside, I remember having a poster that I bought at a yard sale that said, it's by an artist, Keith Davis. I think he was a Sag Harbor artist. And maybe it was the poster for this actual effort, but it was Halt the Highway.
Halt the Highway.
It was a Halt the Highway. Now, the chairperson of Halt the Highway was a very familiar name to anyone in East Hampton. He's passed away a few years back, but it was Tom Twomey. He was an attorney, very active in local politics. He was actually Judith Hope, a supervisor of East Hampton Town's husband. Active in the library, active, you mentioned to me, in Guildhall. I mean, a real community-minded individual.
Yes.
He was dead set against the highway. And, there was a letter, I'm just reading now. This letter he wrote in, I'm going to go a little ahead, but it was a letter he entitled The Super Highway. And he was talking about the super highway will make our town a bedroom. Listen to this one. Will make our town a bedroom community for migrants from Western Suffolk. Listen to this. Oh my gosh. I mean, these new people will jam our village streets. They will school their children in our school. Listen to this. I got to tell you, I didn't realize this until
you're reading it out loud to me.
Now, wow, this was really harsh. They will skyrocket our taxes. They will demand and make possible new giant shopping centers along Montauk Highway and other roads in our town. And Esperanza, interestingly, remember, this was also around the time of Bridgehampton Commons.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
I mean, so that was probably Esperanza sort of fuel to the fire in a sense. But so Mr. Twomey continues in this letter. If anyone doubts the superhighway will cause, and he was using superhighway as a real derogatory, like really negative, will cause all of this. Just look at the overcrowded, polluted condition of Western Suffolk, the quiet, once peaceful villages of Patchogue, Sayville, Bayshore. Wow. Those were fighting words.
Well, definitely a very grim outlook on this. Nothing good about it.
No.
According to him.
Now, of course, there were people that were still in favor of it, but one of them being Perry Duryea, who was still Assembly Speaker. We're going to go into 1974 now. So this is right around the time of Tom Twomey's letter. And Now, despite assurances, now this is, I'm going into 1974, despite assurances by Assembly Speaker Perry Duryea that the $80 million, 23-mile long extension of Sunrise Highway has been killed by the voters of New York State, the project was still not written off by the state's highway agency. They were still talking about going ahead. It's normal. We have to get site approval. And so they weren't really giving up the dream just yet. But a couple of things did start happening, which caused Perry Duryea to have his doubts. Now, this is a lot of this I've culled from a New York Times article of this era. Now, Perry Duryea was participating in a series of meetings with his constituents, and he told several hundred people in Southampton and East Hampton, now, talk about doing a 360. There's not one penny of state money involved in the so-called Sunrise extension. There is no money. Let me repeat again, no money.
You should run for office.
You think so? I don't know if I should run for office or I'm like doing like old time radio before my time, but there was no money. And so there's no money before the state legislature for Sunrise Highway. Now, here's a key thing. And Esperanza and I were discussing this beforehand, and Esperanza really went off in a good way on this subject matter, and I'm going to let her do that again now because she made some really salient points. But Mr. Duryea's views were, now remember, this is 1974 we're talking about. With gas shortages, attention should move away from the road and to the Long Island Railroad. And remember, in the past, Mr. Duryea, Perry Duryea, was a big supporter of the extension from Shinnecock to Amagansett, but now all of a sudden he's Mr. Public Transit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So apparently his aide reiterated that position. But I, in seeing that, I would have agreed that would have been the smart thing to do. Frankly, I mean, think about this. Our car culture is really the root of all evil. Frankly, I mean, it really is not a good thing. And had they invested in the infrastructure of the Long Island Railroad at that time, where you could add an additional rail, so you could have light rail, like a commuter rail that could just be between the hamlets and the villages and so forth. I mean, I think that would have been a game changer. Improving the railroad so you could just shoot out here.
To your point, and we're as often happens organically in our Hamptons, we're sort of moving off the actual gist of this whole episode into what could have been, which I think is really such a great point and such an important point. Esperanza and I were talking about this before we started to record, how Esperanza, this episode is going to air after this, but Esperanza curated an art exhibit in Southampton. And I'm sure it's a spectacular, wonderful exhibit that I'd love to go to. And I said to her before we went on air, Esperanza, I'd love to go see your exhibit, but the thought of driving from Springs to Southampton is just untenable to me. And if there was a railroad to Southampton, however, that would have taken me there, a fast rail in 12 minutes or 14 minutes. I used to go from Great Neck to City Field with the train in 14 minutes.
And the fact is, Irwin, you could. I mean, you really could even now with the existing Long Island Railroad, but it's such a lousy schedule that you would go there and be hanging out in Southampton, for 5 hours that you didn't really need to, right? So
right, it's not geared for that. It's strictly, right. And that's the problem. If the money was geared to that, to your point, where we could jump on a train to go to Southampton or to go to West Hampton, or not have the trade parade at all hours, in the morning and evening commutes, where they would be able to take a train out here to get to work and then pick up their work vehicle somewhere.
And by the way, a better functioning train. I mean, that's ultimately my point also, because there is that possibility even now which our Assemblyman Thiel has been, pushing for the commuter train aspect, but it fails all the time.
It does fail all the time. I mean, and we're a car culture in a place that it's just not
built for that.
It is not. This place was never built for the kind of traffic Now we're getting back into a somber portion of our Hamptons. It was never built. It was never built for the infrastructure cannot handle what we currently have here in terms of everything, whether it name it, but particularly on the roads.
Yeah.
And had this money been earmarked, because I think this money just, I don't know what happened to this money, but it certainly wasn't earmarked for the Long Island Railroad, because I think they still have the same lousy train schedule, that they had
For the
50 years
last
ago.
50 years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean,
exactly.
nothing has changed. So the aid continues. Mr. Duryea is calling for it in legislative negotiations on mass transit. Famous last words. If it happens, I certainly don't see any evidence of it. Now, Tom Twomey, the chairman at the time of Halt the Highway, his group would proceed to have funds for design shifted to the Long Island Railroad by having a bill submitted which would rescind the department's right to design this highway. We want the expenditure stopped. It would be wasteful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's more Tom Twomey commenting, most of all, now the community, and now listen to this. Now, even though what Mr. Duryea just said, Tom Twomey is still, I guess, a little bit worried. The community still has to know that this road is not dead, as we are being led to believe, and they still have to voice their opposition to convince the federal government that we don't want it. Oh, boy.
It's tough. We have these problems still to this day. With different public works, nonetheless.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because look, and you can discuss the pros and cons of whether or not the bypass should be built. There is always that theory, build it and they shall come, and which tends to be true. I guess if it was easier access out here, would there have been more fears of turning into more of a bedroom community? Esperanza, it's possible, I guess. I mean, it would have been easier, but I still think there would have been a lot of traffic.
Regardless, yeah. I mean, I think about the idea of the Riverhead roundabout. What do you call it? The traffic circle.
Yeah.
And I think of the existing brilliant idea of a Wainscott that would have a similar traffic circle, and I cringe at the idea, because imagine if 50 years ago or over 50 years ago that traffic circle in Riverhead was so congested. How would a traffic circle here on 27 in Wainscott alleviate traffic? I just can't even.
I really don't. It's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I remember, like, over the years, you probably do also, there was some traffic easing measures. County Road 39 was widened at one point.
And look at it now.
Yeah.
It's a parking lot.
It's still a parking lot. I guess it would have been more of a parking lot had they not done that, but then again, how much more of a parking lot can it be? I mean, you're at a crawl. So
yeah,
I just, the answer, I guess, would have been, really, the answer does come back to the train. We were talking about this, look how all of the fast rail in Europe, rail travel is so much more important and prevalent in Europe than it is here.
Mm-hmm.
And Esperanza, Everett Rattray's comment, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Probably we would have been damned if we did, but we certainly are still damned that we didn't.
Yeah.
I hate to leave it there, but I don't know if there's anything else to even add to this. It's, Tim Ferguson, our friend, we did an episode about Bridgehampton Common. He, put together a piece. I'd recommend, he's a friend of the show, and he writes some really interesting things, but he wrote an article about this called Hampton's Traffic and the Road Not Taken at timwferguson.com. I'd recommend anyone that wants to, peruse this this conversation further, but he sort of gave an alternative about what if it was built kind of thing and everything else. And, he makes some interesting arguments, but at the end of the day, well, let me put it to you like this. Maybe we should close out this episode in this manner, Esperanza. In your gut, are you happy that this bypass was never built? I mean, do you remember, like, you were very young at the time. I mean, but do you remember the dialogue other than what your dad was saying at the time when the whole bypass was going on?
I don't know,
Right.
but I think that, again, like I would agree, and I think Tim Ferguson is the one that writes about it. Yes, he says there was the gathering consensus among planners and other urbanologists that new roadways never relieved the congestion elsewhere. They just filled up with traffic of their own, and I would agree with that. I think that's what happens.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a river overflowing. It'll find ways to then become other little rivulets and other little rivulets and other little rivulets, and then it just takes over, and it's a flood. So my feeling is I have to speculate, hypothesize, whatever, that it would have. I believe Tom Twomey, not in all his opinions, but but I think he was right that this would have been more quickly, would have turned into the suburbia that we're now seeing it turn into. So I don't know. This is a tough thing. Another word of wisdom from my father, he always said there should be a toll at the Shinnecock Canal. So there you go.
And there's also, and not to mention a definite portion of the population who, after they got their little piece of the earth, they wanted it closed completely, right?
Oh, right. Like the total gated community. Don't let anybody else in.
I've got mine. Don't let anyone else in. Yeah, exactly. But it really, it's funny. Like when I was researching this, and even during this dialogue, I've sort of gone back and forth on this, thinking about, well, would it have eased things? But then again, there's, you read about something like what Mrs. Tiska said with farming 300 acres in Bridgehampton. I guess it would have been lost anyway to development, the way so much of it has over the past 50 years. But a road cutting through this, and an eminent domain, and taking over land in that manner, there's something about that that's unsettling also.
Yes, I agree. Sort of a more violent reaction to it than
yeah. But the reality is, so if we're push it back to present day 2022, here we are in a place that's just growing in leaps and bounds population wise since the pandemic. More people living here. The role of work has changed so dramatically that people don't need to commute. They could work remotely in an infrastructure that can't handle it. I mean, there really aren't any easy answers, but that railroad issue really would have. That might have been that.
Yeah, I think
that's a would have, should have, could have. Maybe
railroad still should be an investment, and a little zoning change would be helpful.
Now that's a can of worms we'll have to save for the next episode of our.
We'll have to maybe interview Judith Hope, but anyway,
exactly. Esperanza, that was again, meaty topic, a tough topic in a lot of ways too. But
there's no right answer, right? I mean,
it's a good way of putting it. It's hard to come up with a right answer. I guess it's a no one. Hindsight's always 2020, and it's hard to know what would have. It's such a hard thing to even imagine having a road like that, as here, if it was in place. But look, the positive, if you will, we live in such a desirable place that people just want to be here. But that's creating a lot of the problems that we're currently
right. Well, I think that might be, and we, again, another topic for another day, but they want to be here, but not necessarily for the reasons that we would want them to be here for.
Well, she's opening a second can of worms on an episode about the highway, but there's such good food for thought. I mean, it really is, because
because it is about sense of place.
It is, Esperanza,
and it's about the history.
And the truth of the matter is, all of these things just sort of blend into one another. I mean, all these issues are just combined into one.
Yes, they do. Yeah,
for sure.
Great
Esperanza,
exchange. Thank you.
wonderful. That was fascinating stuff.
I
And
need to exit off of this highway now.
exactly, so we're going to officially podcast version Halt the Highway episode.
Great.
Thanks, Esperanza.
Thanks, Irwin.